Hi, my name is Dr. Megan Fay, and today I'm going to be talking to you about exposure strategies for challenging your experience of ARFID. Welcome back. I'm licensed psychologist Dr. Megan Fay. This is the second video in my series on learning about your avoidant restrictive food intake disorder, also known as ARFID. In the first video, I gave a brief overview of ARFID and treatment, including how to find a treatment provider. If you haven't checked it out, go back and give it a watch. In this second video, I'll be talking to you about exposure strategies that can be used for addressing ARFID. As a reminder, these videos are not a replacement for treatment. I recommend finding your own individual therapist to practice these strategies with. So let's get started. First of all, what is exposure therapy? In the last video, I discussed a kind of therapy called cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, which is an evidence-based treatment that explores how our thoughts influence our emotions and our behavior, and vice versa. One of the principles of CBT is that by testing out our beliefs, we get to change our beliefs about a situation, which can change how we feel about it and how we might behave in reaction to that situation in the future. One way we can do this is through something called exposure therapy, which is a form of CBT. Exposure therapy is where we practice intentionally exposing ourselves to the thing that we fear or avoid so that we can learn how to handle those fears in new ways. This can help us approach rather than avoid similar situations in the future. So how do we do this with ARFID? As we covered in the last video, many people struggle with ARFID due to a few different reasons. One is issues with disgust in reaction to qualities of the food, such as texture, taste, shape, color, brand preferences, and so on. A second is a lack of interest in food, as well as feelings of fatigue when eating, or difficulties pushing through fullness. And a third is a fear of the consequences of eating, such as a fear of choking, gagging, or vomiting. With exposure practice, we want to target whatever your core difficulty is and engage with it in planned practices that start off easier and increase in difficulty incrementally, kind of like starting at the bottom of a staircase and working up to the top of the staircase until you progressively reach the top. When doing exposure challenges for ARFID, this means practicing engaging with elements of the food that disgust you or elicit fear. There are some key features that should be kept in mind when building an exposure practice. An exposure is a planned, intentional practice with a set beginning and end. It's not something that we're just dealing with as it happens out in the world, but rather an exposure is something that we're practicing on purpose with the aim of staying with avoided feelings of disgust, discomfort, uncertainty, and so on. This planned practice makes it easier to tolerate unplanned challenges that occur in your daily life. A very important thing to keep in mind when doing ARFID exposure practice is that the goal is not to like the food. The goal is to practice tolerating the food. This goal will allow you to eat anything, anywhere, even if you don't like it, or you're afraid, or you're uncomfortable. So let's get into some specific examples of exposure practices. One way to start off is to pick a feared food and practice progressively engaging with it in small, manageable steps. Breaking the task down into very small pieces can make it easier to practice staying with the feelings of discomfort that come up and then build off of that practice progressively. For example, you can start off by touching the food, then smelling the food, licking the food, taking a bite and then holding it in your mouth for 5 seconds and spitting it out. Then taking a bite, holding it in your mouth for 10 seconds and spitting it out, then taking a bite, chewing it, and then spitting it out again, and then finally taking a bite and chewing it and swallowing the bite, so that you're progressively working up to engaging with the food and finally swallowing it. Another way to up the ante in this practice is by taking larger and larger bites each time. If something goes awry, you can always go back a step and practice there before moving on again. The key is to stay with the practice rather than bailing when it gets too hard. So if something is too difficult, go back one step. If you struggle with getting full too quickly, exposure practices should target eating past the point of fullness. For example, drinking water until you feel a little bit too full and working to tolerate that feeling. A practical way of increasing how much you're eating on a daily basis can be to eat 2 bites past the point of fullness at a meal, and then continuing to increase by 2 more bites at the next meal, and so on. This can help your body physically adapt to a greater volume of food in a manageable way, and the key is that you're continuing to add a little bit more each time so that you don't notice you're making huge changes. If you struggle with eating in different settings, an exposure challenge can be taking a safe food to different places and eating it across the various settings. Another related challenge would be to order a safe food at different places, such as eating a hot dog at a baseball game, a cookout, the pool, a restaurant, and so on. This kind of challenge could be targeting a few different variables, such as tolerating not knowing who prepared the food, eating a different brand than your preferred brand, or having it prepared in a slightly different way than you might usually prepare it. If you're very particular about the way you eat or have certain rituals you engage in, an exposure practice could focus on targeting disruption of these rituals so that you can learn to tolerate eating without things being right or a certain way. Examples of this can include taking a bite without checking it or inspecting it first. If you avoid edges, intentionally practice eating the edges. Or if you never combine foods, practice having those foods touch and then eat them, or even mix them together. These examples don't cover all the ways ARFID presents. The key take-home message is to practice doing the things that you avoid while keeping in mind that the goal is not to like the food. The goal is to practice eating even when you don't like the food. At the core of all this practice, we're really learning to tolerate disgust, discomfort, change, and uncertainty. Thanks for checking out this video. Check back soon for the 3rd video in the series, where we'll dig into a specific strategy for trying new foods that's called chaining. If you've liked this video, please rate, review, and subscribe. Again, I'm licensed psychologist Dr. Megan Fay. Thanks for stopping by.